You have been doing it backwards. Not slightly backwards, not a little off course, completely and entirely backwards. And because of this, every technique you try, every visualization you practice, every affirmation you repeat, they produce nothing lasting. Not because the principles are wrong, but because you are applying them in the wrong order. There is an order to creation. It is not a mystery. It is not a secret locked away from extraordinary people. It is a law, as impersonal and reliable as the law of gravity. And when you understand it, when it truly registers in you at a level deeper than intellectual agreement, your relationship with your desires will reverse completely. They will stop running away from you. They will start running toward you. I am Abdullah. Many decades ago, I taught these principles to a young man named Neville Goddard in New York City on West 72nd Street. He was broke. He was confused. He wanted his life to change and could not understand why all of his effort was producing so little. What I showed him changed everything. Not just for him, but for the hundreds of thousands of people who eventually heard what he taught. What I gave him, he gave to the world. But today I want to go back to the beginning. Before the lectures. Before the books. To the source of what made it all work. Stay with me through this entire teaching. Because what I am going to show you by the end of this video will require you to unlearn something you have believed your entire life. And that unlearning is the very thing your desires have been waiting for. Let me begin by showing you exactly what you are doing wrong. And I say this not to criticize, but because I have seen this same error in every person who has ever come seeking change. Every single one. You want something, a relationship, financial freedom, health, recognition, whatever it may be. And so you focus on getting it. That seems logical, doesn't it? You want a thing, so you focus on the thing. You visualize the thing. You work toward the thing. You yearn for the thing. You check for signs of the thing arriving. But here is what you are actually doing when you focus on getting something you do not yet have. You are broadcasting a very specific signal from consciousness, not the signal of having, the signal of lacking. Every time you reach toward a desire from a place of not yet possessing it, you confirm to your deepest mind that this is your truth. You are someone who wants but does not have. You are someone who is waiting. You are someone who is incomplete without this thing. And consciousness, which is the only creative power in existence, does not respond to what you want. It responds to what you are. It reflects back the state you are living from, not the state you are reaching toward. This is why so many people who study these principles remain stuck despite their sincerity. They are imagining from the wrong place, from the outside looking in, reaching toward the desire rather than occupying it. They have the order of creation exactly backwards. And here is that order. Once you see it, you cannot unsee it. Consciousness is first, always. Consciousness is the cause of every single thing that appears in your life. Your circumstances, your relationships, your finances, the opportunities that find you or pass you by, none of these are random. None of these are the result of luck or forces outside of you. They are the precise, inevitable reflection of the consciousness you have been living from. As Neville taught from my instruction, consciousness is the only reality. Everything else, the physical world you can touch and see and measure, is simply consciousness expressing itself in form. This means something that will initially disturb you if you take it seriously. Your current circumstances are not the cause of how you feel. They are the effect of what you have been in consciousness. The difficult condition in your life did not produce your inner state. Your inner state produced the condition, cause and effect, but not in the direction most people assume. Consciousness is cause, the outer world is effect. And this is precisely why trying to change the outer world first never produces lasting transformation. You cannot fix an effect by treating it as a cause. If you change your circumstances without changing the consciousness that produced them, the circumstances will simply return, or new ones, equally unwanted, will take their place. Because the cause, the inner state, has not changed. Now, the question that matters is this. What state of consciousness are you actually living from right now? Not the state you believe yourself to be in. Not the state you aspire to occupy. but the one you are actually inhabiting, the one revealed by your unguarded inner conversations, by your automatic emotional response when something goes wrong, by what you feel in your body when you think about the thing you most desire. Do you feel the quiet, settled assurance of someone who already has it? Or do you feel the reaching, the longing, the subtle but persistent sense of absence? Whatever you honestly feel in those unguarded moments, that is your current creative state. That is what consciousness is using as its instruction. Most people, if they are honest with this inquiry, discover that their inner life is running a conversation entirely at odds with their desired outer life. They want abundance, but their inner world is a running negotiation with lack. They want recognition, but their inner conversation is an argument with invisibility. They want freedom, but they keep imagining the walls. And this inner conversation, not the outer circumstances, is what is producing the reality they experience. Once you see this clearly, the path forward is simple. Not always easy, but simple. You must occupy a different state, not reach toward it. Not try to feel it during a scheduled practice session and then abandon it for the rest of the day. Occupy it. Live from it as a premise. The way a person who already has what you desire goes through their ordinary day, without rehearsing whether it will happen, without monitoring external signs, without needing reassurance. It is already theirs. It is simply their life. They live from that consciousness naturally, and reality reflects it automatically. This is what Neville came to understand completely, and I want to show you what it looks like when a person applies this correctly, even against conditions that appear completely immovable. A ship's captain once confronted Neville at one of his lectures. He was a trained and experienced pilot who had sailed all over the world. There was only one thing standing between him and the sailing routes. He wanted the Seamen's Union had closed the book on his request. Because of seniority rules, he was permanently restricted to certain waters. He told Neville, "The Union is adamant. They have given me their final answer." And Neville told him something that initially made no sense to him at all. He told him, "You have given the Union a power that belongs only to your imagination. The Union does not create your reality. Your consciousness creates your reality. The Union, like every outer condition, is simply reflecting back the state you have consented to live from." Neville instructed him to stop arguing with the outer circumstance entirely, to stop imagining the restriction, to instead stand, in his imagination, on the bridge of his own ship, sailing freely in the waters he desired, and to dwell there until it felt natural, not as a hope, but as his actual present reality. The captain did this. He took his imagination off the obstacle and placed it firmly in the end. He later wrote to Neville from Vancouver. He was working a full year's route, sailing legitimately into the very waters the Union had declared permanently off limits. The restrictions dissolved, not through argument or appeal, but through a change in the captain's own consciousness. When he stopped broadcasting the frequency of restriction and began living from the frequency of freedom, the outer world rearranged itself to match. This is the law. But here is what separates those who get results from those who do not. The captain did not simply understand the principle. He occupied a specific state. He stood on the bridge of his ship in imagination and stayed there. He did not construct the image and then walk away from it. He lived from it. He let it become his operating reality rather than a wish. And this is the distinction I want you to understand more than anything else in this video. There is a difference between imagining something and inhabiting something. Most people imagine. They picture a scene, generate a feeling for a few minutes, and then return to their ordinary state of consciousness, the one that is reflecting their present circumstances. This is like building a doorway and then not walking through it. What actually creates change is when you stop visiting the new state and begin living from it, when it becomes the ground you stand on rather than the destination you are trying to reach. Before I go further, I want to pause here. If what I am describing is resonating with you, if some part of you recognizes that you have understood these principles intellectually, but have struggled to stay in the state when daily life pushes back, comment the word reset in the comments right now. When you do, you will receive the Manifest Reset. It is a free guide containing 5 specific shifts for the moments when this practice becomes difficult, because it will become difficult sometimes. Not because the principle is complicated, but because the habitual mind resists change. It argues, it presents the current evidence and says, how can you assume something that contradicts what you can see? The manifest reset shows you how to stop forcing the feeling when the assumption starts to feel like effort. It teaches you the difference between releasing a desire and giving up on it, one of the most important distinctions in this entire teaching. It shows you how to return to your chosen state when you have slipped out of it, not by forcing your way back in, but by a simple, immediate inner shift. Comment reset right now. And stay with me, because what I am about to share gives you the practical mechanics of how to actually occupy the state rather than merely visit it. I want to tell you about an engineer Neville worked with in New York City. This man had never earned more than $10,000 a year. He wanted to work for a specific international firm on Madison Avenue, a company that sent its engineers across the world to build bridges, dams, major infrastructure projects. He wanted the work, the responsibility, and the salary that came with it. He had already done the research. He had visited the building, ridden the elevator, gotten off at the correct floor, and walked into the office. He knew exactly which desk he would occupy, where he would hang his coat when he arrived each morning. But he was still on the outside. He was still constructing the image, and then stepping back from it, which kept him in the state of someone who wants the job, rather than someone who has it. Neville gave him one instruction. Stop constructing the scene and start inhabiting it. Ride the elevator not as someone hoping for the job, but as someone for whom this is already their ordinary morning. Get off at the floor, walk to the desk, let it be natural. Within 2 weeks, he was employed there at $20,000 a year. He spent years after that traveling the world, building the dams and bridges he had imagined. The bridge of incidents, the entirely unpredictable chain of outer events that connected his inner state to his outer result, built itself. He did not devise it. He could not have devised it. He simply occupied the end, and the means arranged themselves. This is not a metaphor. This is how consciousness works. Your imagination, when it is genuinely occupied in the state of the wish fulfilled rather than the state of wanting the wish, is already in contact with all that is needed to bring the outer reality into correspondence. What stops most people at this point is the gap between where they are and where they want to be. The present circumstances look so different from the desired state that the mind refuses to settle into it. It keeps slipping back to what it can see. I want to address this directly, because it is the thing that undoes more sincere practitioners than anything else. The outer evidence you see right now is not a report on your present consciousness. It is a report on your past consciousness. It is always delayed. It is always catching up. What you can observe in your external world today is the expression of the state you were living from weeks or months ago, not the state you are inhabiting in this moment. This means that when you genuinely shift your inner state today, the outer evidence will not respond immediately. There will be a gap, and it is in that gap that most people abandon the inner work entirely. They see no change. They conclude nothing is happening. They revert to the old state, and they reap the old harvest again. Neville taught one of his students a story that illustrates this gap perfectly. A man in Los Angeles had been trying for 7 years to save enough money to travel to St. Louis to visit his son, who was being raised by relatives there. 7 years of effort. Every approach he devised, saving harder, looking for a higher-paying job, produced nothing. He was perpetually on the threshold, but never arriving. He was told to stop imagining the means entirely. Stop imagining the money. Stop imagining the journey. Take his imagination directly to the end, to himself, with his son, in St. Louis, and hold that end without concern for how it would come about. He followed this instruction. Shortly after, a job opportunity arose, but it took him to New Orleans, not St. Louis. The surface mind would have seen this as a failure. The distance was wrong. The route was wrong. But he held the end. 3 months later, he was transferred to the St. Louis run, and given a 24-hour layover there every single week. The path was not what he would have designed. It could not have been designed by any surface-level reasoning. But when consciousness occupies the end, the bridge of incidents, whatever form it takes, builds itself in the dark and leads there. The last thing I want to show you is what happens when this principle is applied with complete commitment over time, not as an occasional practice, but as a persistent, settled way of inhabiting the desired reality. A young man named EP entered the 50-mile outrigger canoe race from Molokai to Honolulu. This is one of the most demanding ocean races in the world. The Hawaiian teams were considered completely unbeatable. They had dominated the race for years and were the clear favorites for any given year. In his second year competing, EP's team finished 7th out of all the international teams that entered. That was considered a remarkable result, but EP was not satisfied with 7th. He spent the entire following year imagining that his team had won. He did not imagine competing. He imagined winning the specific, settled reality of a team that had already crossed the finish line first. He built his own canoe. He formed a new team. He trained, and he held the end. The following year, in front of every major competing team from around the world, his team crossed the finish line first. Ahead of the Hawaiians, ahead of every other experienced international team, he was handed a paddle engraved with the words, "World Champion." Notice what he did not do. He did not merely hope to win. He did not affirm winning in an abstract, distant way. He occupied the reality of having won deeply enough and persistently enough that it became the organizing principle of everything he did that year. And when he showed up at the starting line, he was already in consciousness, someone who had won the race. Consciousness that is faithfully inhabited expresses itself. It cannot do otherwise. The law is impersonal and precise, so let me make this direct. The one thing you must do first, before you change your strategy, before you look for new opportunities, before you attempt any outer action, is change the state you are living from. Not the state you are reaching toward, the state you are living from. The inner ground of who you take yourself to be. Right now, in this moment, you do not work toward the desired state. You step into it and inhabit it even when the outer evidence contradicts it completely. Especially then, because the outer evidence is always late. It is always showing you the past. What you occupy now in consciousness is what will express itself in the days and weeks ahead. This is the order of creation. Consciousness first, everything else follows. And assumptions, when they are faithfully maintained rather than abandoned at the first sign of resistance, harden into fact. Neville taught this from his own living experience. Every person whose story I have shared with you today proved it from theirs. You can prove it from yours. If there is any moment between now and that proof, when you feel yourself slipping, when the old state tries to reclaim its ground, when doubt makes the assumption feel hollow, when the outer evidence seems too loud to ignore, I want you to have a way back. Comment "reset" below, right now. The manifest reset is free. It contains 5 practical shifts for precisely those moments. One shows you how to stop forcing the feeling when the inner work becomes strained. Another teaches you how to shift from seeking consciousness to having consciousness. A third shows you the difference between releasing your desire and giving it up, which is one of the most important and most misunderstood distinctions in this entire teaching. These are based on everything I taught Neville. The practical tools you need for the moments when this practice asks the most of you. Comment "reset" now. There is one more thing I need to tell you before you go. Everything I have shared with you today, the order of creation, the difference between visiting and inhabiting a state, the faithful maintenance of assumption against contradictory evidence, this is the foundation. This is what makes every other teaching work. But there is a specific area where most people fail to apply this foundation even when they understand it in every other area of their life. That area is money, financial consciousness, the state from which people relate to wealth, or the absence of it. I taught Neville specific things about wealth consciousness during our years together, habits of mind that most people never become aware of, that silently undermine every other effort they make, not techniques. Habits of consciousness. And 5 of those habits are the subject of the next teaching you need to watch. It is called 5 Forbidden Money Habits Abdullah taught Neville that ended his financial struggle forever. That video is appearing on your screen right now. Watch it next, because what you have received today will become twice as powerful once you apply it specifically to the way you have been relating to money. The foundation is in place. Now it is time to build on it. The video is on your screen. Watch it now.
When I tell you to relax and allow yourself, I'm not offering common advice. I'm speaking of a return to your divine nature. Modern man has learned to live at war with life itself. He wakes up tense, works tense, prays tense, and when he tries to believe, he still does so in despair, like someone trying to pluck fruit from a tree before its season. But creation cannot be forced. It flourishes when the inner soil is at peace. The secret lies in understanding that true faith is not effort, it is rest. The one who truly believes doesn't need to chase after manifestation because they already feel complete before anything happens. Relax, not like one who gives up, but like one who understands. Understand that the universe responds to you not for what you do, but for what you are. When the mind quiets, consciousness begins to act. It is in this inner silence that the divine law works. Life doesn't need you to push it. It only needs you to stop resisting. Every thought of anxiety is a barrier. Every feeling of trust is a portal. The impossible begins to move when man abandons the fear of losing control and surrenders to the certainty that control was always within. To allow is an act of power, not weakness. It is when the Creator stops interfering with doubts and permits the assumed state to become flesh, form, fact. Many ask the world to change, but few understand that the world is merely the echo of their own vibration. You can change 1,000 external circumstances and still remain stuck in the same cycle, because it is not the scenario that creates the feeling. It is the feeling that creates the scenario. So, when I tell you to relax, I mean trust in the law so completely that you dare to stop struggling. When I tell you to allow yourself, I mean recognize your right to live as one who already is what they desire to be. This is true prayer, not supplication, but the conscious rest of one who knows the invisible has already responded. Faith does not shout, does not force, does not beg. Faith observes, feels, and gives thanks. And it is precisely in this state of inner repose that the impossible bends. For when you cease effort, the Spirit begins to act. When you stop trying to manifest, manifestation comes to you. Natural, inevitable, silent as the dawn. The first thing man needs to understand is that the universe does not respond to tension. Tension is the cry of fear disguised as effort. When you try too hard to change something, you are telling your own consciousness, I don't have it yet. And as long as that feeling persists, nothing true can move in your favor. Power is not in the struggle, but in the inner rest that comes from conviction. What creates is not the force of will, but the serenity of one who already knows that the will has been fulfilled. Everything created begins in the invisible, and the invisible only takes shape when the mind calms enough to hear the silent command of the Spirit. Many believe that faith is energy, movement, intensity. But true faith is repose. It is the cessation of resistance. It is when you release the need to control time, method, and people, and simply decide to remain in the certainty of the outcome. This stillness is not laziness. It is mastery. It is the same state that Jesus demonstrated when he slept in the midst of a storm. The sea only calmed when he remained tranquil. The storm doesn't cease because man shouts. It ceases because man remembers who he is. When you are tense, you are saying that there is something outside of you that needs to be fixed. But when you relax, you declare that everything is already resolved on the invisible plane. Rest is the language of those who trust, and this trust is a vibration that the world recognizes. Money, healing, love, success, all these states are attracted by the same field of consciousness, that of serenity. It is impossible to create harmony from chaos, and it is impossible to manifest what you desire while vibrating at the frequency of the fear of not achieving it. Realize that tension is born from the belief in separation. Man believes that the Creator is outside, and therefore tries to call upon power. But power has never been outside. It is the very I Am within you. And the I Am does not need to chase anything, only to declare what it is. Effort disappears when consciousness recognizes itself as the source, and that is why true spiritual work is not fighting against the problem, but resting in the solution. When you learn to relax and trust, you will discover that the impossible becomes inevitable. Doors open, the right people appear, paths reveal themselves, not because something new has emerged, but because you stopped blocking the flow that always existed. Faith does not create something new. It reveals what was already yours from the beginning, and everything begins the moment you take a deep breath, quiet your mind, and allow the state of certainty to take the place of fear. In that exact moment, creation has already begun. The second principle is to understand the power of the feeling of already possessing. For it is not desire that manifests, it is the state of consciousness. Desire always says, "I don't have it yet." Feeling says it is already mine. And the universe does not respond to words, but to the vibration of the state you sustain. When you desire something intensely, but continue to feel its lack, you are creating a distance between yourself and that thing. But when you feel with gratitude and tranquility that you have already received it, you dissolve time. The invisible begins to organize itself to reflect the image you have assumed as true. People think they need to imagine to attract. No, you imagine to abubiafi. The image is not a tool to manipulate the world, but a mirror of the inner world. The man who imagines and feels the fulfillment of desire is giving form to the invisible. Emotion is the clay of creation. It is the divine breath that transforms thought into flesh. Therefore, it is not about visualizing with your eyes, but feeling with your heart. When the feeling is maintained naturally, without anxiety, without haste, without doubt, it becomes law. Everything seen was born from an invisible state. Poverty, sickness, rejection. These are unconsciously assumed states. But the same power that created them can dissolve them the moment you assume the opposite. This is why Jesus said, "To him who believes, all things are possible." Because believing is not a vague promise, it is a precise mental operation. To believe is to assume the end as real, even when the world shows the contrary. When you feel the result as something natural, the universe will have no choice but to mirror that state. Manifestation is not a prize, it is merely the faithful reflection of the identity you embody. This is why so many pray without results, because they pray like beggars, not like heirs. The Creator does not ask, He declares. He does not wait, He becomes. Experience this power right now. Choose something you desire and feel, for an instant, the serenity of already possessing it. Do not ask how or when. Just remain in this inner rest. See yourself living the result, not as a dream, but as a memory. The secret is to feel as if it were now. And the more natural this sensation becomes, the faster the world will adjust. Allow yourself to inhabit the state of already accomplished, for everything you seek already exists, merely awaiting your recognition. It is not the world that needs to change, it is the feeling within you. The exterior merely obeys, and the impossible dissolves the moment the I Am silently declares, "It is already mine." The third principle is absolute trust in the law. Most men fail not from lack of faith, but from giving up too soon. They plant the seed, and before the fruit sprouts, they dig up the soil to see if anything is growing. But the law of imagination is like the law of the harvest. The invisible always fulfills what has been assumed, provided you do not interfere with doubt. When you truly believe, there is no need to see immediate results. You know that what has been decreed internally has already begun to move, even if the world still appears the same. Trust is the point where faith ceases to be hope and becomes knowledge. It is the silent state of one who says, "I know it is done." And this certainty is so powerful that it alters the invisible field around it. For everything visible is merely a projection of consciousness. Doubt is the wind that distorts the reflection, but trust is the sun that makes it clear. When you remain firm in your assumption, the entire world bows to obey. The most common mistake is trying to help the law work. You imagine the result, feel it for an instant, but then immediately try to control the path, interfere, force. And in that instant, you declare that you do not trust. The law does not need help. It is perfect. Just as a seed contains the entire code of the tree, the state you have assumed contains the entire route to its manifestation. Your role is not to direct the process, it is to sustain the certainty. Many seek signs to believe, but the signs come later. The invisible always precedes the visible, and when you understand this, anxiety disappears, because what you have internally assumed is already happening, even if it cannot yet be measured. Time is merely the interval between the invisible and the vision, and this interval shortens when there is trust. Trust is therefore the silence of the Creator. He does not ask, "Will it happen?" because he has already decreed, "It is done." It is the same power that moved the prophets that made the impossible natural. The man who trusts does not implore, he gives thanks. He does not seek signs, he rests. He does not fear delays, he knows that everything is in perfect order. So when doubt comes, do not fight against it. Simply return to the feeling of fulfillment. Remember that the law does not fail. The invisible is faithful. Reality is not a test of patience, it is a mirror of your state, and the world will begin to change the moment you stop doubting. Because absolute trust is the most powerful command the universe recognizes. The fourth principle is to understand that imagination is the true altar of creation. Everything that exists was first imagined, and nothing can be manifested without first being felt as an inner image. The common man thinks imagination is fantasy, but the wise know that it is the divine instrument through which consciousness gives form to the invisible. When you imagine, you are creating, and what is created internally, sooner or later, will be reflected in the mirror of the world. Therefore, what you contemplate in silence with emotion becomes the invisible mold of what is to come. Every image you repeat with feeling is a decree. You may not realize it, but you live within the images you accept as real. Failure, scarcity, rejection, none of this happens by chance. They are merely faithful reflections of what man sustains within himself, even if unconsciously. If your imagination is a temple of worry, the world will be a mirror of scarcity. But if it becomes a sanctuary of trust, everything around you will begin to flourish. Disciplined imagination is the most feared and most neglected power. Because it demands vigilance, it requires you not to surrender to appearances, not to mentally feed the opposite of what you desire. The awakened man observes his thoughts as a gardener observes the soil. He knows that every seed sown there will grow, whether he wants it to or not. Therefore, he cultivates pure, firm images, laden with feeling and purpose. Learn not to be impressed by what your eyes show you. When something goes against you, do not react, do not rebel, turn inward and reform the image. Replace fear with the vision of the desire already fulfilled. Do this calmly, with conviction, and the world will have to adjust. No external force is more real than the image sustained with faith. The undisciplined mind creates by accident. The awakened mind creates by intention. And this difference defines a man's destiny. While the unconscious manufactures repetitions of pain, the conscious creator molds new possibilities with the same energy, just directed. Everything that happens to you is merely the obedience of matter to your images. So carefully observe what you are creating when you think, feel, and imagine. There is no neutrality in this process. Every sustained image is a command to reality. Therefore, choose to imagine with love, abundance, victory, and rest. Make your imagination an altar where only what you wish to see flourish is permitted, because the world is a faithful mirror of what your mind holds in silence. And he who learns to imagine with purity does not need to struggle. He merely observes in peace the invisible taking form before his eyes. The fifth principle is the courage to allow. And few understand what this truly means. To allow is not to give up. It is to trust the law so completely that you can rest amidst uncertainty. It is the silent strength of one who knows that everything is already happening in their favor, even when the world seems to deny it. Allowing is the Creator's most mature gesture, because it requires abandoning the mind's control and surrendering to the wisdom of the Spirit. The mind wants to rush, compare, interfere. The Spirit simply knows it doesn't need to prove anything. It merely sustains the state and observes the perfect unfolding of things. Most do not allow because they are afraid to lose. They want to maintain faith, but they watch the clock, analyze signs, doubt the silence. But it is in this silence that the law works. While anxiety speaks, creation is interrupted. The universe acts in calmness. The noise of haste is the sound of disbelief. When you finally quiet down, when you breathe and say, "It is done, and I trust," the invisible moves with divine precision. The courage to allow is the ultimate proof of faith. To allow is also to let life surprise you. It is not to try to push the river, but to follow its course. Because when you are aligned with the desired state, everything that happens, even what seems like an obstacle, is part of the manifestation. Nothing is loss, nothing is coincidence. The awakened man recognizes that even detours are paths. He does not fight against facts, he reads them as messages, and because he does not resist, reality itself dissolves and reforms before him. It takes courage to trust when nothing seems to be happening. It is easy to believe when results appear. It is difficult to maintain faith when the field is still empty. But it is precisely there that the miracle is gestated. The flower is not born at the moment of the sprout, but in the silent depths of the seed. So it is with your desires. The invisible is always working, and your only task is not to interrupt the process with fear. To allow is the same as saying, I accept that the power is within, not outside. It is the complete abandonment of resistance. It is the rest of the spirit that recognizes its unity with the source. And in this repose, reality begins to move. Because faith does not demand guarantees, it creates the path as it walks. So, when everything seems still, do not rush. When doors seem closed, do not despair. Allow, feel, trust. The invisible does not fail. Everything is being adjusted to reflect the state you now maintain, and if you remain firm in this serenity, the impossible will become inevitable and will come to you, natural as the rising day. Now understand, with all the strength of your soul, nothing in the world needs to change for your life to change. Everything is already within you. Man's mistake is to seek outside what can only be born from within. He asks fate, people, circumstances, but continues to ignore the only place where power resides, his own consciousness. The exterior is a mirror, and the mirror reflects nothing unless there is an image before it. Therefore, true transformation begins the moment you decide to stop reacting and start assuming. Assuming what? The state, the feeling, the silent certainty that everything already is. From now on, do not beg for changes. Command in silence. Do not implore the universe. Remember that you are it in expression. When doubt comes, return to the feeling. When fear tries to dominate you, breathe and say, I am that which I have decided to be. Stand firm, even if the world shouts the opposite. Because the world is slow, but consciousness is instantaneous, and sooner or later the visible will obey the invisible. The work of the Creator is not to shout orders at reality, but to feel it already fulfilled. It is to rest in the midst of the storm, knowing that the storm is merely a temporary scene. When you reach this state, the impossible bows. Doors open, not by magic, but by obedience, because the world is a servant of the inner state. So relax, allow, and live as one who already possesses everything desired. Walk with the serenity of one who needs to prove nothing, because they know that victory is already theirs. The invisible is in motion, and the only thing that can delay manifestation is your own resistance. Cease effort, abandon fear, and sustain certainty. From this moment, command in silence and observe. Everything that belongs to you by divine right will come to you. Love, prosperity, health, peace, all already exist, awaiting your permission. Power is not in doing, it is in being. And he who remembers to be what he desires awakens the very God within himself. And when man awakens, the entire world awakens with him. You want to understand in 20 minutes what took Neville Goddard 67 years to discover. He journeyed through the desert of doubt, the labyrinth of beliefs, the struggle against the visible world, until he realized the enemy was never external. The revelation didn't come as a lightning bolt, but as a surrender. When he finally silenced his own mind, something happened. He saw that everything he sought was already there, within him, from the very beginning. You too are trapped by the same misconception that kept him blind for decades, believing that life is something that happens to you and not something you project. The world you see is merely a reflection of what you assume to be true within yourself. Nothing exists outside of consciousness. People, opportunities, losses, failures, miracles, all are mirrors of the state you inhabit. It took Neville a lifetime to understand that the world is not cause, but consequence. He tried to change circumstances, tried to act, pray, repeat, wait. until he realized that all external effort was a confession of ignorance. Because one who knows the law does not struggle, they assume. The human mind lives like a beggar before an infinite banquet. It asks, it begs, it waits for signs, when all it needs is to assume it already has. This is the key Neville finally found. Imagination is not fantasy. It is the very substance of reality. The invisible is the real. The visible is merely the shadow of what has already been accepted in the invisible. What you call future is not something that will come. It is something that already is, waiting for you to align with the corresponding state. Neville, after years of practice, understood that every prayer is useless if it comes from a state of lack, that every affirmation is empty if it comes from someone who still doubts, and that every desire is a prison if you don't inhabit it now. He discovered that the secret is not in doing but in being, that the power is not in fighting against appearances but in ignoring them with the serenity of one who has already won. He realized that true faith is not hope, it is remembrance. You don't need decades of study to understand this. You only need an instant of lucidity, an instant when you stop seeking and remember, I am the cause of everything. Everything I see is the echo of what I accepted myself to be. The world doesn't react to words, it reacts to states. Reality doesn't respond to requests. It responds to the identity you silently sustain. That is why many pray and few receive, because they remain the same, even while asking. What took Neville 67 years to discover is that there is no path between wanting and having. There is no bridge. The only movement is internal, that of consciousness changing its state. The one who desires and the one who already is are two completely different realities. The world you experience now is merely the confirmation of what you chose to be at some point in the past. And what you will be tomorrow is already being decided now, at this very instant, by the quality of your feeling. So, listen carefully. Everything you need to know about creation is right here before you. Not in the words, but in the silence that sustains them. I didn't come to teach you something new. I came to remind you of what you forgot. You are the creator pretending to be the creature. And until you accept this truth with your whole being, the world will continue to show you the reflection of your own denial. Nothing exists outside of consciousness. This is the first truth Neville needed to live, not just intellectually comprehend. Because the human mind accepts the idea that thoughts create, but continues to believe that a solid, fixed world exists, independent of its perception. This is an illusion. What you call reality is not a stable structure. It is a constant projection of what you are internally. Everything that exists around you is a mirror of your consciousness. The street, people, situations, money, illness, healing, everything is merely the external image of what you have accepted as truth within yourself. As long as man believes that something out there can influence his life, he will continue to live as a victim. This is the root of ignorance, because what is out there is merely an echo. You hear the sound, but forget that you were the one who produced it. Every experience begins as an internal state, a silent recognition of being something. When this recognition is sustained, the world materializes the corresponding conditions. It is like a shadow following the body. The physical world is the shadow of consciousness. Neville struggled against this for years, trying to change the shadows. He prayed, affirmed, acted, believing that external movement would bring results. But the more he exerted himself, the more the world resisted, until he realized he was trying to move the mirror instead of changing the face staring back at him. Nothing changes externally until something changes internally. When you understand this, life becomes simple. Not easy, but simple. Because you stop reacting and start choosing. The world is not an adversary, it is an obedient collaborator. It has no will of its own. It merely reflects the image you project from your inner state. If there is scarcity within you, the world closes. If there is fullness within, it opens. It's not magic, it's law. A law that does not judge, reward, or punish. It merely reflects. Therefore, consciousness is the only creative power. Everything you call chance is merely a reflection of what was unconsciously assumed. You can repeat 1,000 times that you believe in abundance, But if deep down you feel fear of loss, life will respond to that fear, not to the words. The universe doesn't listen to what you say. It responds to what you are. Neville understood late in life that the world is not an obstacle, it is a mirror, and that the awakened man does not struggle with the reflection. He smiles at the mirror and changes his face. You can spend an entire life trying to fix the scenery, or you can close your eyes, go within yourself and adjust the cause. What happens externally is inevitable because it is merely the echo of what has already been decided in the invisible. And when you understand this deeply, you will never again fear the world, because you know it is merely you projected in the form of life. The second principle is that the state is everything. It took Neville many years to understand that creation does not happen through isolated thoughts, but through a sustained state. The state is the continuous vibration of consciousness, the inner atmosphere in which you live, even when you are not speaking, not imagining, not praying. It is the invisible tone that emits a silent command to the universe. Everything that happens in your life responds to this tone. Thoughts are like sparks, but the state is the constant fire. That is why people can think positively all day long and still live in scarcity, because their internal states continue to be those of doubt, lack, or waiting. Neville realized that a state is not created with effort, but with acceptance. It is a calm, natural, silent feeling. When you desire something, the desire shows the state you are not yet in. You only desire what you feel is missing. Therefore, the true work is not to chase after the desire, but to change the state to one where the desire is already fulfilled. This is the great transition, to stop trying and start being. The common man says, "I want to have," but the awakened one says, "I am." The difference is subtle, but it is everything. Assuming a state is an act of silent faith. It is living as if the invisible were already visible, as if the outcome were already present. And this does not mean deceiving yourself or forcing yourself to believe, but internally inhabiting the feeling of already possessing. When you truly enter this state, something changes. Your body relaxes, the mind quiets, and anxiety disappears. Because you stopped asking and started recognizing. You stopped affirming a lack and started expressing fullness. Neville observed that each person lives trapped in a state without knowing it. The poor person is not poor because they lack money, but because they inhabit the state of one who always needs. The sick person is not a slave to illness, but to the state of being sick. When the state changes, the body, the environment, and the circumstances follow. That is why he said, "Change your state, and the world will change with you." Everything you see now is a portrait of the state you have been sustaining. Nothing is fixed. States are like clothes. You can take them off and put on others. But it takes courage to abandon the old self, the one who complains, fears, and waits. Because it will resist. It will say it's impossible. But the impossible only exists within the old state. The new state is the only place where miracles are natural. The secret is not in mentally convincing yourself, but in feeling different. When the feeling changes, the state changes. When the state changes, the world transforms. It is inevitable. This is the point Neville finally understood. You don't manifest what you want. You manifest what you are. And what you are, at this instant, is determined by the state you choose to inhabit now. The third principle is that imagination is the only creative power. Neville heard this from me many times before truly understanding what it meant. Because the human mind confuses imagination with dreams, fantasy, daydreaming. But imagination is divine power itself in action. It is the instrument with which consciousness creates all things. What you see as matter, body, money, circumstance, is merely solidified imagination. Everything began as an inner image sustained with conviction. The world is the mind made visible. Imagination is not something you use now and then. It is what you are. At every moment, you are imagining something, consciously or unconsciously, and life responds to these images. Every sensation, every internal dialogue, every mental scene is a creative act. The problem is that man imagines without knowing it. He creates misery and then calls it destiny. He visualizes failure and then blames others. He imagines rejection, and the world obeys. What you keep alive within yourself is what the universe undertakes to make tangible. Neville realized that all true creation is born from feeling something imagined as real. It's not enough to see mentally, you must feel, because feeling is the seal that imprints the image onto the invisible substance. When you imagine with emotion, the subconscious receives the command as something completed. It does not distinguish between the real and the imagined. It merely obeys. And this obedience is infallible. You can doubt, get distracted, forget, but what has been accepted as true in feeling will find a way to manifest. Imagination is the portal between the invisible and the visible. Everything you desire already exists on this inner plane. When you imagine consciously, you are not creating something new. You are selecting, choosing, aligning yourself with the version of reality where it is already a fact. This is why people who try to manifest do not succeed. They imagine like someone who asks, and not like someone who creates. One who asks imagines lack. One who creates imagines possession. Neville understood that disciplined imagination is the bridge to any transformation. When he began using his nights to construct inner scenes of fulfillment and yielded to sleep, feeling them as real, his life began to change effortlessly. He realized that sustained imagination is the true act of faith. Because faith is not hope, it is inner vision sustained with certainty. When you imagine something and no longer doubt, the entire universe bows before that conviction. Therefore, imagination is not merely the beginning of creation, it is creation itself. The world you see is the result of the collective imagination of humankind, and your personal world is the exact reflection of the images you hold. There is no power outside of this. Everything that was, is, and will be is born first in the mind of one who dares to see the invisible as already existing. This is the true alchemy, transforming thought into substance, invisible into fact, imagination into reality. The fourth principle is that true faith is the forgetting of the old self. Neville only understood this after a long time trying to believe. He thought faith was insisting, repeating, affirming strongly until something happened. But faith is not effort, it is surrender. It is the moment when you completely abandon the old identity and without hesitation assume that of the being who already possesses what they desire. The true leap is not from doubting to believing, but from wanting to being. As long as you still identify with what you are asking for, you remain the one who does not have. And life, obediently, can only keep you in that role. Faith begins when the old self dies, when you stop seeing yourself as the one who struggles, who seeks, who needs to prove something, when you empty yourself of all resistance, of all attachment to the story you've been repeating. This moment is silent and often painful, because it is a real death, the death of the character you believed yourself to be. The man of faith stops sustaining the old name, the old identity, the old emotion. He does not fight them, he merely abandons them. He puts on a new state naturally, like someone changing clothes, and lives from it. Neville realized that faith is not a force that convinces the universe, but the inner disposition of already being in union with the desired. It is living as if nothing else needed to happen. It is refusing any external proof that contradicts the new state. The man of faith does not react, he remains. He does not seek signs, he knows. And it is in this silent knowing that the invisible begins to organize itself. Everything that is true is born from inner stillness, not from anxiety. Faith is not a cry to heaven. It is an inner silence that says, "It is already." And when this silence is established, the world bends. Because the universe recognizes only that which is assumed with conviction. The old self doubts, compares, measures, waits. The new merely is. And between these two states there is an abyss. The abyss that separates time from eternity, man from divine consciousness. When Neville understood this, he stopped trying to make things happen. He merely assumed and rested. And everything began to move naturally. People appeared, circumstances changed, and the impossible became commonplace. He discovered that faith is not struggle, it is memory. It is remembering who you truly are, that the power was always within you. and that the world never had a will of its own. One who has true faith does not ask for things to change. He changes, and the world follows. The fifth principle is that everything already is. This was Neville's final revelation, the point where all effort ceased and the mystery became simple. He understood that nothing is coming, nothing is forming, nothing is being created in the sense that man understands. Everything already exists in a potential state, within consciousness. Time is merely the way the human mind decodes the eternal now. What you call manifestation is not the arrival of something new, but the revelation of what has always been there, waiting for you to become capable of perceiving it. When you desire something, that desire is not born of emptiness. It is the echo of an already existing reality, calling you to itself. Desire is the language of another version of yourself saying, "Come here, it is already done." And yet, man insists on asking, pleading, struggling, acting with desperation, as if what he desires were external, distant, in the future. But the future is merely the illusion of the present yet unrecognized. What you seek is not coming, it is being chosen now in the invisible by the state you sustain. Everything already is. This phrase destroys fear, dissolves doubt, and frees man from the slavery of waiting. Because if everything already is, then the work is not to acquire, but to allow. It is not to conquer, but to align oneself. That is why imagination is the supreme power. It does not create something new. It merely shifts the focus of consciousness, like someone changing the channel of a station that has always been broadcasting. What changes is the receiver, not the signal. Neville realized that the waiting time is merely the interval necessary for the human mind to accept what is already true on the inner plane, and that when acceptance is total, time disappears. Manifestation occurs without warning because, in essence, there was never any distance between desiring and having. There was only resistance in believing. When you feel that something is already real, the universe has no other choice but to confirm it. It does not create from nothing, it reveals from consciousness. This is why miracles appear instantaneous for some and prolonged for others. It is not about when, but how much you accept. The man who knows that everything already is does not rush, does not doubt, does not watch the clock. He merely lives in the now with serenity, because he knows that everything necessary has already been provided. He walks in the invisible with the confidence of one who knows that the invisible is the real, and the visible is merely its shadow. Everything already is. This is the final statement, the key to all creation. When you understand this, you will stop asking and start commanding. You will stop waiting and start being, because what you call life is not a sequence of events, but the reflection of what you choose to be now, in this eternal instant. Now that you have heard these truths, understand, there is nothing more to seek. What took Neville 67 years to discover is that all of life is merely the projection of consciousness. Everything you call destiny, coincidence, failure, or miracle is nothing more than an exact response to the state you have decided to sustain. There are no exceptions, no prayer, no effort, no technique has power beyond what is already contained in what you assume to be. Creation does not happen when something appears, but when you change your inner state and remain in it until the world inevitably bows. You need to understand that power is not in repeating words, but in silencing yourself before doubt. Power is not in asking, but in recognizing. Each time you ask, you declare that you do not yet have. Each time you doubt, you affirm the opposite of what you desire. Life is too precise to err. It merely reflects what is sustained with faith and feeling. Therefore, abandon the position of a beggar now and assume the throne that has always been yours. Stop begging the world to change. Stop waiting for signs, coincidences, or luck. Everything you need is already within you, awaiting only your decision to be. From this instant, choose the state and remain in it. Close your eyes and see what you desire, not like someone observing a distant dream, but like someone reliving an already fulfilled memory. Feel the peace of one who knows it is done. Feel the gratitude of one who has already received. Walk with this certainty. Speak, think, act as one who already possesses. And when doubt tries to drag you back, remember It is merely the last breath of the old self dying. Ignore it with serenity and return to the chosen state. Nothing and no one can prevent you from being what you already are in consciousness. The world does not create your identity, it merely reveals it. Therefore, stop fighting against the shadows and turn toward the light within you. All that is already is. All that will be already is. Reality does not wait, it obeys. So, in silence and certainty, command the invisible what is already true in your heart. Remain in this knowing, because the Creator does not ask. The Creator declares, and the universe responds, Amen.